Hey, welcome back to the shop. This is Zach over at NV Woodworks. Today I'm going to be sharing my method for getting a scratch-free finish in Alumilite blanks. This would work with pretty much any resin cast blank or a plastic, acrylic, that kind of thing, finishes even. But this is the method that I use on my blanks, and it's a little bit of an update video to the Beall Buffing System video I did a little while ago. Still using the buffing wheels as the final step, but over the past couple months I've been honing in the process between, you're shaping it with the tool and getting to the buffing wheel for that final polish. And so at this point, it's very quick, easy, and I'm getting good results. So I wanted to share that. So stick around and I'll show you what I do. All right, so I've basically boiled my method down to 6 steps. I have 3 parts to that. First is sanding, the second is polishing, and the third is buffing. And what I do is off the tool, so I'm done shaping whatever the blank is. Generally I'm usually turning pens, but whatever it may be, I usually leave some tool marks on there. I don't make it perfect. A lot of people could use a skew chisel and get a really perfect surface off the tool with a finish cut with a skew, but I just generally use a spindle gouge, and there may be a few little tool marks here and there. It's not perfect. So I start by sanding, and what I'm doing is I want to level out everything, and you want to start with a nice smooth surface, get all those little blemishes out. That's the first step to getting a really good polish. I find that 240 grit sandpaper works pretty good as the first step in most cases. Now I use Abranet. I like this sandpaper the best. It's kind of like a screen, so if you're not familiar with it, it's basically like a mesh in a sense, but it's very durable. It lasts longer than normal sandpaper in my experience, and it doesn't clog as much. And even if it will clog, sometimes you'll get some sanding plastic. It's pretty easy to get it to kind of clog up. Just hit it with some air and spray it out. Basically, it's a mesh, so you can kind of clean it out a lot better and then continue sanding. I buy it by the roll. I find it's about 30 bucks. I get it on Amazon. I'll have a link to where I get this on the show notes on my website, but 30 bucks. I think it's about 25 feet long, if I remember correctly, and about 2 3/4 inches wide. Works great. I have it in pretty much every grit, and it works on wood, acrylic, whatever, resin, whatever kind of material you're sanding, basically. So I start with 240, level out that surface, and then I move up to 400 grit Abranet. That's the sanding phase. After that's done, I move to the polishing phase, which most people think of micromesh as polishing pads or the polishing paper. Micromesh works great. That's a good product. I actually found a different product that's made by 3M, typically branded under Zona Hobby Tools, and it's just a sheet. It's thinner than what most people think of with micromesh. Personally, I don't like those pads. I don't like not being able to kind of get the feedback in my fingertips. And so I had actually switched to micromesh sheets. They sell it in sheet form a little while ago. The problem with that stuff is it's pretty expensive, number one. But number two, the micromesh sheets are like shades of gray. They're not, green, red, blue, so color-coded where you can actually see it. Similar to the micromesh pads. Those are well colored. You know which grit you're using. Yeah, the sheets, totally like 50 shades of gray, and it's really difficult to know what you're using. So this stuff is cheaper, and it's color-coded. I like that, and it works just as good. What I do is I actually use only the first 2 grits. And these are the same grit levels, micromesh or this 3M stuff. So I only go through the first 2 grits, then I move on to buffing. Now, a couple of tips with the sanding. When I'm done, just leveling out the surface, so I have the lathe spinning and I sand the blank, and I may stop and make sure that I have everything, but once it's leveled, what I do is I'm going to stop the lathe and I'm going to sand along the length of the tube, or whatever the blank may be, sand it lengthwise. What that does is when you move to the next grit, you're going to turn the lathe on and sand that way, and it's going the opposite direction. You'll know exactly when you've gotten rid of the 240 grit scratches when you're sanding with 400, because there won't be any more in the opposite direction. So it kind of helps out. You can do that throughout the whole process. I find that the most important step for me, because I'm sanding quite a bit more, or the most, with 240 grit, is between 240 and 400. Now I kind of do the same thing at the end. When I'm done with all the polishing papers, the second grit, I leave it where the lathe is spinning, and I leave those scratches going around the tube. Then when I move over to the buffing wheel, I use the triple E wheel first, and I'm going to polish it along the long length of the blank, the opposite direction that it came off the polishing pad. So that way I know exactly when I've gotten all the scratches out from the polishing stage, and I can move on to the white diamond buffing wheel. And again, first thing I do with the white diamond is I actually go the opposite direction again, and that's going to be cross grain, let's say. Then I finish up polishing along the length of the tube with the white diamond. So just kind of wanted to share that little process. By changing directions, putting scratches in one direction and then taking them out the other, you'll know when you've actually taken out all those previous grit scratches. So it's a pretty good process. Now, a couple of other little tips. You know, where you begin sanding, I generally find that 240 is a good place to start, considering the finish that's left on the blank that I'm turning. In some cases, you may have to drop down lower. If you're really good with a skew chisel and you can put just a perfect finish on the blank, you don't need to start at 240. You can start at, you know, maybe 1,000 even. So it just kind of depends. You're going to have to kind of play with it yourself to see where you really need to start. What I would recommend is, if it seems like it's taking a good amount of time on the first grit, you probably should just drop down to the next grit lower. You'll get through it quicker and it'll go a lot smoother. Now, the next thing I want to mention is lathe speed when you're sanding. Generally, it's better to sand at a lower speed. And I used to run my lathe at about 1400. I was pretty lazy. I didn't like changing the belts. And so when I'm turning a pen, it's on the fastest speed setting for the belt, and I would just turn the variable speed dial down. Well, that's about 1400 RPMs. And I did this for a long time, and I didn't really think that there was a problem with it. But fairly recently, I kind of slowed my speed down to about 500, and I've been really kind of looking at, you know, around 500 to 700, what kind of results do I get? And it turns out that I'm getting a lot better results. I'm actually getting it, you know, sanded or polished. It's more effective, and it's actually faster. So in general, I would really recommend slow the speeds down a little bit, and kind of, you'll have to play with it and see what works best for you. It also kind of depends on size of the blank and the material in some cases, but slower speeds seem to work a little bit better for me. So I recommend checking that out. Maybe don't be so lazy, drop that belt down a little bit and sand at a lower speed. You might actually be surprised that you're getting better results. The last thing is, this whole process kind of takes me, I would say, from start to finish in most cases on a pen. This is kind of what I'm generally on a pen blank, and I usually do one at a time. But I can usually get from, you know, off the tool, start sanding and get through the buffing in probably about 15 minutes. It doesn't generally take much longer than that. Just kind of depends. I might have missed a scratch here or there, and I have to go back to the triple E wheel and kind of buff that out, and then just kind of put that final touch on with the white diamond. So if you have any comments or questions, you can leave those down below. I'm out there on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can get a hold of me there and kind of keep up with what I'm up to in the shop on a daily and weekly basis. I also wanted to let you know that I started live streaming on Twitch. Now, Twitch is kind of a platform like YouTube, but it's a little bit more geared towards streaming live. And so I've chosen to use them as the platform, but you basically just go to my channel, and what I'm doing is Dunkin' Junk Live. That's what I'm starting with. And it's really fun because it allows the audience to get involved with these Dunkin' Junk tests. So what I'm doing is every week I let the audience pick the project that the material that we're going to try and cast. Help with colors and ideas on what to do with the casting, and so it's really fun. We get a kind of a group effort and test some stuff out with casting. So I'll probably be doing different live broadcasts down the road, but that's what I'm starting with. And so every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, you can catch me on Twitch and join in the fun. Hope to see you over there. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.